Hey everyone, welcome to my channel. We're back in our Minecraft world today, and I've got a few more Reddit stories for us. So get comfortable, and let's start with the first one. Am I the a-hole for stealing a $700 bottle of bourbon from my brother-in-law? The woman who wrote this says she didn't steal anything. She got lucky at a liquor store event, bought the bottle herself, and took it home. Her brother-in-law, however, is convinced that bottle should have been his. A few people in her family collect bourbon, mainly her brother-in-law, and her dad. Some bottles are extremely rare, expensive, and difficult to find. So collectors will line up outside stores or attend special events just for a chance to buy one. Her brother-in-law had already built up a pretty large collection, but there was one bottle he'd never managed to find, a bottle of Pappy Van Winkle. According to her, it was basically his holy grail of bourbon. Last Thanksgiving, a liquor store near her sister's home organized an event with a large selection of rare bottles. Everyone who arrived at 8 in the morning received a number, and those numbers were called in a random order throughout the morning. When your number came up, you were allowed to buy one bottle that was still available at the regular retail price. Everyone would eventually get a turn, but the people called earlier obviously had a much better selection. Her brother-in-law had been really excited about the event, but at the last minute, he found out that he had to work on Thanksgiving morning, so he asked his wife, the poster's sister, to attend in his place and try to get the Pappy for him. Her sister didn't care about bourbon at all and didn't really want to spend the entire morning dealing with what she called this whole bourbon circus. So she asked the poster to come along and keep her company. The poster had already been considering going anyway. Her own collection was much smaller than her brother-in-law's, but she genuinely enjoyed bourbon and wanted the chance to find something interesting for herself. So she agreed to go with her sister. Their dad was invited too. But he decided that staying home sounded much better than spending Thanksgiving morning waiting for liquor store numbers to be called. Honestly, understandable. When they arrived, the two sisters received numbers 54 and 55. Because the order was random, the poster's number was called surprisingly early, after only about 15 other people. And when she walked up to choose her bottle, the Pappy was still there. She bought it for around $100. The same bottle was nearly impossible to find locally and could usually sell for somewhere around $700. Her sister's number wasn't called until much later. By then, the Pappy was gone, so she bought a bottle of E.H. Taylor for her husband instead. It was still a good bottle, but it wasn't nearly as rare, valuable, or exciting as the one he'd been hoping for. And when the sisters finally returned home, the disagreement started almost immediately. The moment her brother-in-law saw the Pappy, he said, "That's my bourbon." In his mind, the poster had only attended because she was acting as his stand-in alongside her sister. He argued that if he hadn't been forced to work, he would have attended the event himself, received that opportunity, and bought the bottle. So, as far as he was concerned, the Pappy belonged to him. She completely disagreed. She hadn't gone there as his representative, and she'd never promised to hand over anything she bought. Her sister was attending specifically for him, but the poster saw herself as a separate participant who also happened to be keeping her sister company. She had her own number, used her own money, and chose a bottle for her own collection. From her perspective, she simply got luckier than her sister did. And yeah, I think that distinction matters. She admitted that she could understand his argument in a slightly different situation. If her sister had brought along someone who didn't care about bourbon at all, purely to create a second chance of getting the bottle for him, then it would make sense for that person to hand it over. But that wasn't what happened here. The poster was already a collector, had independently wanted to attend, and would have been happy to find the Pappy, even if her brother-in-law had never mentioned it. Her brother-in-law never fully accepted that explanation. He still refers to the bottle as his Pappy, and whenever the subject comes up, he brings up what the family now calls Pappygate. The argument is mostly in good fun. She says she loves both him and her sister, and she isn't trying to damage the relationship over a bottle of bourbon. She just wants an outside opinion, so he might finally stop claiming that she schemed him out of the bottle he'd wanted for years. A lot of people suggested that they open the bottle together, share it, and finally end the argument. But apparently that wouldn't really solve the problem. Her brother-in-law mostly collects bourbon rather than drinking it. He might try a glass if she opened the bottle, but what he really wanted was the unopened bottle sitting in his own collection. So splitting the bourbon wouldn't exactly bury the hatchet. He wants the hatchet displayed on his shelf. Honestly, I don't think she stole anything. Her sister was clearly there on her husband's behalf, but the poster had her own reason for going, received her own random number, and paid for the bottle herself. Giving it to him would have been incredibly generous, but I don't think she was obligated to do that. And his argument that he definitely would have gotten the bottle if he'd been there doesn't really work because the order was random. He might have been called early, or he might have been called after every bottle of Pappy was already gone. That was the entire point of the event. Everyone was taking their own chance. Also, maybe I've watched too much The Vampire Diaries, but whenever people start treating bourbon like some sacred family artifact, my brain immediately goes to Damon pouring himself another glass. He'd probably be wondering why everyone was arguing over the bottle instead of just drinking it, although considering this one is worth $700, maybe even he'd hesitate for a second. So yeah, shout out to everyone who watched this series. But anyway, speaking of relatives who feel like they have a claim to something that belongs to someone else, this next story involves a much larger amount of money. It's called Am I Overreacting for Not Wanting to Contribute $3,000 a month to My Parents' Mortgage? The woman who wrote this is 22 and recently started working full-time. She earns around $6,400 per month after taxes and currently lives at home with her parents. She knows she's in a fortunate position. She doesn't have to pay normal market rent. Her living expenses are fairly low, and staying with her parents gives her a chance to save money while she starts her career. She also makes it clear that she does want to help her family. The disagreement is really about how much help they expect from her. Her parents want her to contribute $3,000 every month toward their mortgage for the next 3 years. They're calling it a loan and say they'll eventually pay her back whenever she needs the money. Their reasoning is that making those extra payments now would reduce the principal much faster and save them around $150,000 in interest over time. They also believe the arrangement would benefit her because she can continue living at home instead of spending money on rent and other expenses. But $3,000 is almost half of everything she takes home each month. And even though the payments would only last for 3 years, her parents have suggested that paying her back could take another 3 years after that. So in practice, a huge portion of her income could be tied up for around 6 years. She's only 22 and she's trying to save for her own future, build some independence, and eventually move out. Giving up access to that much money makes her extremely anxious. She didn't immediately refuse to contribute. She offered $2,000 per month instead, which is still a very significant amount of money. That would let her help with the mortgage while keeping more flexibility for her own savings and expenses. Her dad said he wasn't technically going to force her to participate, but he also refused to negotiate the amount. He knows exactly how much she earns and believes that $3,000 is a reasonable expectation. Okay, that part would make me uncomfortable. $2,000 a month is already a pretty serious offer. Acting like it barely counts doesn't seem fair. Whenever she explains that she isn't comfortable giving up almost half of her income, her parents ask what expenses she could possibly have while living at home. From their perspective, she doesn't currently have rent, children, or many major bills, so they don't understand what she needs the extra money for. And because she earns more than most people her age, they've started making her feel selfish or unreasonable for hesitating. She says the conversations have reached a point where she's questioning whether her concern is somehow irrational. But she isn't only thinking about what she needs this month, she's thinking about an emergency fund, eventually moving out, possibly buying her own home, and having enough money available if her circumstances suddenly change. At 22, the fact that she doesn't have many expenses right now is exactly what gives her the opportunity to build that foundation. And handing over $36,000 every year would change that completely. But the biggest red flag? They are extremely vague about how and when they will actually pay her back. When she suggested writing down a formal agreement, since we are talking about over $100,000, they got super offended. They said things like, "So you don't trust us?" and told her that if she's going to be like that, then don't help at all. The phrase, "we'll pay you back when you need it," is also doing a lot of work here. The money would be going directly into the mortgage, not sitting untouched in a savings account. So the post never really explains where a sudden repayment would come from if she needed the money quickly. Maybe her parents have a reliable plan for that. But if they do, they haven't shared it with her. She later clarified that their normal mortgage payment is actually lower than $3,000. They aren't asking her to cover the monthly bill because otherwise they'd lose the house. They want her to add extra money on top of what they already pay. So the principal falls faster and they owe less interest in the long run. So this isn't really emergency assistance. It's more like they want their daughter to finance a strategy that improves the family's long-term financial position. I can understand why the idea looks attractive to her parents. If she's living at home, earning a strong salary, and willing to help, using some of that money to reduce a large debt could benefit the entire household. And if they genuinely repay every dollar, then technically she wouldn't be giving the money away. But that still doesn't mean they get to decide how much risk she should feel comfortable taking. A loan only works when both sides agree to the amount, the timeline, and the conditions. Right now, it sounds more like they decided what she should contribute and expected her to accept it. For me, the refusal to write anything down is the part that really changes this. If everyone genuinely expects the full amount to be repaid, then putting the agreement on paper protects the parents too. It prevents misunderstandings about how much was given when repayment starts and what happens if someone's situation changes. Instead, they seem to want the certainty of receiving $3,000 every month while asking her to accept uncertainty about everything that happens afterward. I don't know. I'd be nervous too. That doesn't necessarily mean she should live at home without contributing anything. Her parents could reasonably ask for rent, groceries, utilities, or another clearly defined household contribution. But a normal monthly contribution is very different from committing almost half of her income to a 6-year informal financial arrangement. And she already offered $2,000, so it's hard to argue that she's refusing to help at all. So no, I don't think she's overreacting. She can love her parents, appreciate living with them, and still decide that this particular arrangement is too much. Being financially capable of doing something doesn't automatically make you responsible for doing it. And when the amount reaches 6 figures, asking for clarity isn't selfish. It's just sensible. Okay, after that entire mortgage situation, I think we need something a little lighter. This next post is called, "He Did What?" It starts with a woman repeatedly trying to skip a grocery store line and one man deciding that he was suddenly very, very hungry. Several years ago, the man telling this story was waiting at the deli counter in a grocery store. His wife had asked him to pick up some potato wedges, and luckily, the line wasn't particularly long. He was around 4th or 5th in line, and there was only one person waiting behind him, so everything should have been fairly quick and uneventful. Then a woman arrived with someone he assumed was either her daughter or granddaughter. He refers to her simply as some lady throughout the story, so that's what we'll call her too. Instead of walking to the back of the line, she stood near the counter and waited for the current customer to finish. Then, the moment that person stepped away, she tried to move forward and place her order. The deli worker stopped her and explained that several people were already waiting. She needed to join the line and wait for her turn. The woman stepped aside, but she clearly wasn't happy about it. And when the next customer finished, she tried to move toward the counter again. Once again, the employee reminded her that she wasn't next. So apparently she understood how a line worked. She just didn't think it should apply to her. This continued every time another person was served. She would start moving toward the counter. The worker would tell her to wait, and she would become a little more frustrated. The man standing ahead of the storyteller eventually heard her complaining to the younger woman beside her. She said the whole thing was ridiculous and that she just wanted some potato wedges. Finally, the man ahead of him finished ordering, and once again, the woman immediately tried to step in front. But this time, the storyteller spoke up and calmly told her that the end of the line was behind him. She did not take that well. She loudly announced that it was supposed to be first come, first served, which, yes, that was exactly why she needed to wait behind the people who had arrived first. Eventually, she moved back to the side, still visibly irritated. When the storyteller reached the counter, he noticed that there were only a few potato wedges left. So the worker explained that more were being prepared, but they would take another 5 or 10 minutes. The storyteller said that was fine. He could wait. The employee then explained the same thing to the woman, who reluctantly decided she might as well wait too. At that point, the storyteller knew exactly what she wanted. He also knew that the fresh batch probably wouldn't contain very many wedges. And after watching her try to skip the line over and over again, a very petty idea began to form. So he stayed right where he was and waited patiently for the new tray to arrive. A few minutes later, the fresh potato wedges were finally brought out. The woman immediately began moving toward the counter again, as though she might still manage to order first. The storyteller gently reminded her that he was next. Then the deli worker looked at him and asked how much he wanted. Normally, customers would order a certain weight, maybe a pound or two, but he quietly said, "I want all of the wedges." The employee paused and looked at the tray. Then he asked, "All of them?" And the storyteller replied, "All of them." The worker gave him a small smile, said, "Sure thing," and began packing up every single wedge. Once the order was ready, the storyteller began walking away, slowly enough to hear what happened behind him. The woman looked at the completely empty tray, turned toward the employee, and shouted, "He did what?" Then she whipped around and stared directly at the man leaving with all of the wedges. He later admitted that he wished he'd turned around, made eye contact with her, and slowly eaten one of the wedges right in front of her. Unfortunately, that idea didn't occur to him until he was already home, telling the story to his wife. Still, he considered it the best $14 he'd ever spent. And to be honest, I think I would do the same. After watching that woman try to skip the same line several times, I completely understand why the temptation was there. The funniest thing is that she kept insisting on first come, first served, and in the end, that's exactly what she got. And yeah, $14 for an entire tray of wedges might be one of the pettiest grocery purchases I've ever heard of. He didn't even need all of them. He just needed her not to have them. Apparently, potatoes are causing a surprising amount of drama today, because this next story starts with mashed potatoes that tasted more like dessert. The post is called, "Am I the a-hole for saying my boyfriend's mom's mashed potatoes are weird?" What begins as a slightly uncomfortable dinner ends up exposing a much bigger problem in a 5-year relationship. The woman who wrote this is 23, and she had been with her boyfriend for around 5 years. His family regularly held Sunday dinners, and she joined them most of the time. By that point, she knew everyone pretty well, and these dinners were usually nothing unusual. But during one of them, her boyfriend's mother served mashed potatoes. The poster put some on her plate, took a bite, and immediately realized that something tasted very different. The potatoes were sweet, not slightly sweet in a way she might have imagined, but genuinely noticeably sweet. She described them as tasting almost like dessert, except they were being served with gravy and the rest of a savory dinner. So, a little confused, she laughed and asked, "Wait, are these sweet?" Her boyfriend initially thought she might be joking, but his mother simply replied, "Yeah, that's how I make them." The poster explained that she'd never had sweet mashed potatoes before. She wasn't trying to criticize the food. She was just surprised by the flavor and wanted to understand what she was eating. But almost immediately, the atmosphere at the table changed. According to her, everyone suddenly went quiet. She tried to move past it and continued eating, but she genuinely didn't enjoy the potatoes. To her, they tasted like cake covered in gravy, and combining that sweetness with the rest of the meal just wasn't working. So she focused on the other food and hoped nobody would make a bigger issue out of it. Unfortunately, her boyfriend's mother noticed. His mother looked at her and asked, "You don't like them?" The poster tried to answer carefully. She didn't say they were disgusting or that the mother didn't know how to cook. She simply said, "They're just a little sweet for me," which seems like a fairly polite response when someone directly asks why you aren't eating something. Her boyfriend immediately jumped in and insisted that the potatoes weren't sweet at all. That confused her even more because they very clearly were. Then his mother made a comment about how some people simply weren't used to real cooking, and that was the moment the poster started getting annoyed. She had tried to be careful with her response, but now the conversation sounded less like a question about personal taste and more like an insult directed at her. So she replied, "I just didn't expect mashed potatoes to taste like cake." And yeah, that comment did not improve the situation. The rest of the dinner became extremely awkward. Nobody really moved past the argument, and shortly afterward, the poster and her boyfriend left. Once they were in the car, her boyfriend told her that she had embarrassed him in front of his family. He believed she owed his mother an apology for insulting her cooking. The poster didn't see it that way. She admitted that the cake comment might have been blunt, but she felt she had only said it after his mother made the remark about real cooking. From her perspective, she had tried to be polite until the conversation became personal. After receiving a lot of confused questions, she added a few details. These weren't sweet potatoes. They were regular russet potatoes, with what she described as a large amount of brown sugar mixed into them. She also clarified that the family was Canadian, and that this wasn't some common regional dish she simply hadn't heard of. She had somehow avoided trying them during the previous 5 years because the family usually served roasted potatoes, or someone else brought the mashed potatoes to larger gatherings. So no, she wasn't imagining the sweetness. There was apparently enough brown sugar in them to make the potatoes taste like an actual dessert. The situation continued bothering her, especially because of the way her boyfriend had handled it. So she tried speaking to him again once they were both calmer. She expected a fairly simple conversation about the dinner, maybe an apology, or at least an acknowledgement that his mother's comment had been unnecessary. Instead, the discussion became much bigger than she expected. As they talked, she realized that this wasn't the first time her boyfriend had automatically sided with his family to avoid conflict. Whenever a disagreement happened, he would try to keep his relatives happy, while leaving her to deal with the uncomfortable part by herself. She had overlooked that pattern before, or convinced herself that each incident wasn't serious enough to address. But this time, something about the dinner made it much harder to ignore. Their conversation turned into an argument, and that argument brought up several other issues they probably should have discussed much earlier. The mashed potatoes weren't the real problem anymore. They were simply the latest example of a relationship dynamic that had been frustrating her for a long time. After 5 years together, she no longer wanted to keep brushing those situations aside just to maintain the peace. Eventually, they decided to end the relationship. She made it clear that they didn't literally break up over mashed potatoes. The dinner simply made her look at the relationship differently, and the conversation afterward confirmed that the issue was much larger than one uncomfortable meal. What bothered her most wasn't that her boyfriend liked his mother's unusual recipe. It was that he immediately focused on protecting his family from discomfort while expecting her to apologize and accept the blame. And well, that escalated much further than I expected from a plate of mashed potatoes. And look, saying they tasted like cake probably wasn't the most diplomatic response she could have chosen, but she was directly asked whether she liked them, after already trying to give a much gentler answer. Then his mother made the comment about real cooking, and her boyfriend acted as though only his girlfriend's reaction was inappropriate. That's where they lose me. Of course, people are allowed to have strange family recipes. Maybe everyone else genuinely loved those potatoes, and because they'd eaten them for years, the sweetness no longer seemed unusual. But someone disliking a dish isn't automatically a personal attack on the person who cooked it. She didn't demand a different meal, and she didn't announce that nobody else should eat them. She just couldn't pretend that brown sugar mashed potatoes tasted normal to her. So the relationship didn't end because of potatoes. The potatoes just started a conversation that apparently needed to happen a long time ago. Still, I don't think I'll ever look at mashed potatoes quite the same way after this one. By the way, I've skipped that part a little, but I was able to find a way out of this cave. I'm gonna head home and hide these diamonds, then we'll most probably come back here with a better equipment. Anyway, let's move away from family dinners before another side dish ends a relationship. The next story is called Saying Yes to Roofing Telemarketers. After spending 2 months telling the same roofing companies to leave him alone, one homeowner finally decided to start saying yes, just not for the reason they were hoping. The person who wrote this lives in the American Midwest, and in late April, their area was hit by a major hailstorm. Their neighborhood was hit especially hard. Roofs were damaged, skylights were shattered, cars were completely totaled, and anything left outside, like patio furniture, was pretty much destroyed. So naturally, almost everyone in the area suddenly needed repairs. And wherever there is widespread storm damage, roofing companies quickly follow. Some were legitimate local businesses, but many were out-of-town companies chasing the storm, hoping to secure as many insurance-funded roofing jobs as possible before moving on to the next damaged area. They began calling people, knocking on doors, and offering free roof inspections. The homeowner had already hired a reputable local roofer about a week after the storm. Because so many properties needed repairs, the contractor was completely booked and hadn't replaced the roof yet. The local roofer also didn't put signs in customers' yards, unlike many of the storm-chasing companies. So from the outside, there was nothing showing that the house already had a contractor, which probably encouraged the other companies to keep trying. But every time they called, the homeowner clearly explained that someone had already been hired. That didn't stop the other companies. For around 2 months, they continued calling and knocking on the door. The homeowner repeatedly explained that somebody had already been hired. They said no, hung up, and even placed their phone number on the do not call list, but the offers for free inspections kept coming anyway. Yeah, I think after 2 months of that, I'd stopped feeling especially polite too. Eventually, instead of immediately hanging up, the homeowner began speaking to the callers. They would ask for the company's name, explain once again that another roofer had already been hired, and then end the call. Afterward, they would look the company up online, find the quick inspection form, and schedule a time for someone to visit the property. So every company that refused to accept a simple no received an appointment instead. The companies believed they were being invited to inspect the damage, discuss the insurance claim, and possibly secure a new roofing contract. But when their representatives arrived, the homeowner explained that the job had already been given to a local contractor. There wasn't a sign outside warning them beforehand, but their companies had already been told during the calls that the homeowner wasn't looking for anyone else. The only reason an appointment existed was because they had refused to accept that answer. On the day the story was posted, 3 different roofing companies came to the house. Every one of them arrived hoping to get a contract signed immediately. And every time, the homeowner explained that a local roofer had already been hired. No sale. No contract, just a completely unnecessary trip to a house whose owner had already said no several times. The homeowner summed up the strategy very simply. If these companies were going to keep wasting their time with calls and door knocking, they were going to waste some of the company's time in return. And apparently, they planned to keep doing it for as long as the calls continued. Okay, so this one is definitely petty, and I'm a little torn on it. The representatives arriving at the house couldn't have known just by looking that another roofer had already been hired, but the homeowner had explained the situation repeatedly over the phone, and the companies kept pushing anyway. After 2 months of calls and door knocking, I can understand why they eventually decided to waste some of that time in return. But at the same time, the employee arriving for the inspection might not be the same person who made the call. They may simply be following an appointment that appeared on their schedule. So the revenge probably inconveniences an individual worker more than the company making the decisions. Still, when a business repeatedly ignores someone's answer, I can understand the temptation to make ignoring that answer slightly less profitable. Maybe the easiest solution would have been for the companies to accept the answer they were given during the first few calls. Instead, they kept offering inspections, and eventually that's exactly what they got. Inspections at a house whose owner had already hired someone else. And speaking of people who completely failed to respect basic boundaries, the next story is called, "Am I Overreacting at My Boyfriend for Almost Eating Both of Our Dinner Portions?" At first, it sounds like a ridiculous argument over food, but the update makes it pretty clear that dinner wasn't the real problem. The woman who wrote this is 25, and her boyfriend is 27. The night before everything happened, they talked about what they might eat for dinner the following day. Neither of them felt like preparing a full meal, so they agreed that they would probably have something small, like a plate of cut-up vegetables. As far as she knew, that was still the plan when the next day arrived. But later that day, her boyfriend's mother arrived at the apartment with a full dinner for all 3 of them. Apparently, the boyfriend had known since that morning that she was bringing food, but he had never mentioned it to his girlfriend. The poster assumed everyone would eat together, so she took out 3 plates. That was when her boyfriend gave her a strange look and sheepishly said that he thought she was only going to eat something small. She told him that, yes, she had planned on eating something small, but that was only because she believed neither of them was going to cook a proper dinner. Had she known his mother was bringing food for everyone, she obviously would have joined them for the meal. It didn't seem like a complicated misunderstanding. There were 3 people, and his mother had brought enough food for 3 people. His mother served herself first. Then the boyfriend took all of the food that remained, including the portion meant for his girlfriend, and placed it on his own plate. He put her empty plate away. Not because she said she didn't want the food, but because she had mentioned the previous night that she might eat something small. That is a very strange conclusion to reach while someone is standing there with a plate, clearly expecting dinner. The poster immediately objected. She pointed out that his mother had prepared enough food for all 3 of them, and that even if he was especially hungry, he could eat a normal portion and have a snack afterward. He could add something on the side, make himself more food later, or simply accept that one person doesn't automatically receive 2 full dinners. But her boyfriend insisted that because she had originally planned to eat something small, the remaining food should all go to him. His mother became annoyed with him as well. She offered to make some French fries so there would be extra food available, and only after she got involved did he finally reduce the size of his portion. His mother ended up cooking the fries anyway, so the poster did eventually receive something to eat, but by that point, the whole situation had already made her extremely upset. There was also an important reason she couldn't simply walk into the kitchen and make herself a different meal. She was only 3 days post-surgery and could barely use her right arm. Before the operation, her own parents had offered her a room at their house so they could help during her recovery. Her boyfriend had become upset by that suggestion. He insisted that she should stay with him because he would take care of her. That promise was part of what made the dinner situation feel so hurtful. She wasn't fully mobile, preparing food was difficult, and he knew that she depended on him more than usual. Yet, when a meal arrived for both of them, his immediate instinct was to claim her portion for himself. He didn't ask whether she wanted any. He didn't offer to split it. He simply decided that her earlier comment about eating vegetables meant she no longer counted. The part that gets me isn't even that he was hungry. It's how quickly he removed her from the equation while she was recovering from surgery and he was supposedly taking care of her. The couple argued about it for the rest of the evening. She explained repeatedly that the issue wasn't only the amount of food, it was the selfishness behind the decision, and the fact that he still couldn't understand why she felt hurt. From his perspective, she had originally said she wanted a small meal, so he believed he had done nothing wrong. From her perspective, a caring partner should have adjusted the plan the moment actual dinner appeared. Now, if this had been a single, thoughtless moment, it probably could have ended with a quick apology. He might have said, "Sorry, I misunderstood," divided the food properly, and everyone could have moved on. But instead, he defended the decision for hours, and according to the update, that reaction was part of a much larger pattern. After reading the responses, the poster had a serious conversation with her boyfriend. The discussion quickly moved beyond dinner and into the state of their 3-year relationship as a whole. She began realizing that they weren't really on the same page, and that she had been overlooking a lot more selfish behavior than she wanted to admit. Eventually, she decided to stay with her parents while she recovered. Leaving wasn't an easy decision. She and her boyfriend worked at the same job, so she knew the breakup could make the next few weeks uncomfortable. She was also still a student and couldn't afford a proper apartment by herself. For a long time, she had been afraid that ending the relationship might leave her without anywhere to live. That fear had probably kept her in the relationship longer than she otherwise would have stayed. Her family had apparently never believed that the boyfriend was a particularly good match for her. That made her hesitant to ask them for help, possibly because reaching out would mean admitting that their concerns had been valid. But once she finally went to their house, she felt much more certain about her decision. She was still worried that her boyfriend might appear and try to convince her to return, but she no longer believed the relationship should continue. Then she shared one more detail that made the dinner situation look even worse. On the night she came home from surgery, she needed acetaminophen because she was in pain and was due for another dose. The nearest pharmacy was only about 300 meters away, less than a 5-minute walk, but she still had to beg her boyfriend to go and buy it for her. He wanted to wait until the following day, even though she was hurting and couldn't easily go herself. So, by that point, the dinner really wasn't an isolated misunderstanding. She ended the relationship and stayed with her parents. Looking back, she said the breakup had probably been overdue for a long time. The food argument simply forced her to acknowledge something she had been avoiding. She had spent 3 years hoping that individual incidents weren't serious enough to mean anything, when together they formed a pretty clear pattern. She did admit there was one part of the relationship she would miss. Her boyfriend's mother was apparently an excellent cook, and she was genuinely sad that she wouldn't be eating her meals anymore, which might be the only positive thing anyone says about dinner in this entire story. For me, the food itself is almost beside the point. Maybe her boyfriend genuinely misunderstood the original dinner plan, but when she corrected him, he still believed that his hunger mattered more than whether his recovering girlfriend had anything to eat. And when his own mother reacted more sympathetically than he did, that should probably tell him something. The fact that he had also resisted buying her pain medication after promising to care for her makes the whole situation much harder to excuse. So, no, she didn't end a 3-year relationship because he nearly ate 2 portions of dinner. She ended it because that moment showed her exactly what being cared for by him was going to look like. And what I can say, apparently it looked a lot like an empty plate. Okay, after that one, I think we should end today with something a little lighter. This final post is called, "I'm no longer getting angry at bad drivers." And no, the person who wrote it hasn't suddenly become endlessly patient. They have just found a much more confusing way to respond. You know that moment when you're driving and someone nearby does something so reckless that you genuinely wonder what they were thinking? Maybe they wait until the very last second to move across several lanes or suddenly cut in front of everyone because they almost missed their exit. It's dangerous. It forces other drivers to react, and naturally it makes people angry. Sometimes you eventually end up driving beside that person. You look over at them with the most obvious expression of, what was that? Maybe they notice, become defensive, and respond with an angry gesture of their own. And now both people are even more annoyed than they were before. The person telling the story recently decided to try something different. When traffic naturally brings them alongside the other driver, they begin with the same serious, irritated expression. They wait until the other person looks over, as though a confrontation is about to happen. But the moment they make eye contact, the expression completely changes. Instead of looking angry, they suddenly smile, nod as though they've just understood something important, and say, "Oh, okay, that makes sense. Sorry." Then they give the other driver a small, friendly wave and continue on their way. Apparently, the expressions they receive in return are priceless. The other driver was prepared for anger. They may have already been getting ready to argue, gesture back, or defend whatever they just did. Instead, they're met with someone acting as though the dangerous driving suddenly makes perfect sense, and for a moment, they have absolutely no idea how to respond. The author says this approach makes them feel much better than getting genuinely angry. There's no shouting, no argument, and no long period of replaying the situation afterward. They get one small moment of harmless confusion and then simply move on with their day, which is probably much healthier than carrying road rage around for the next 20 minutes. And I must admit that one is pretty funny. It's not aggressive enough to become a real confrontation, but it probably stays in the other person's head much longer than an angry look would, because now they're left wondering, wait, what exactly did they suddenly understand? And maybe, just maybe, they'll spend the next few minutes thinking about how ridiculous their driving actually looked. But, of course, I wouldn't recommend chasing someone down, staring at them instead of watching the road, or doing anything that could make the situation more dangerous. But if traffic happens to place you beside them safely, a confused little smile and wave is definitely better than starting a road rage argument. Sometimes the best response is simply refusing to give someone the reaction they expected. So, The author hasn't really stopped judging bad drivers. They've just replaced anger with a very polite form of psychological confusion. And apparently, it works. And I think that's where we'll leave things for today. We went pretty deep underground, found a lush cave, came back with a few diamonds, and even got to see a beautiful aurora on the way home. I also finally added some proper windows to the house, so it's starting to look a bit better. And next time, I think we'll make a safer path down and explore that cave properly. Anyways, thank you all so much for hanging out with me tonight. If you're new here, consider subscribing. It really helps out. And if you like this one, drop a like. It also means a lot. Take care, and I'll see you in the next one. Good night, or have a lovely rest of your day.